There is a little village in the north of Belgium, not far away from Antwerp. Doel is the name, and actually Doel is a village like any other. There is a church here, a cemetery, a school, normal residential neighborhoods, well, and this nuclear power plant right next door. But in fact, Doel is anything but normal, because Doel is a ghost town. Nobody lives here anymore. Well, almost nobody. Most of the houses are run down and abandoned. Everywhere you look, only relics of the past remain. And the typical Belgian village life died out many years ago. So, the big question is, what the heck happened here? Why is Doel an abandoned ghost town? Why are all those houses ruins? And why doesn't anybody want to live here anymore? Well, there's one thing I can already tell you. This nuclear power plant you can see right behind me has absolutely nothing to do with it. But this place you see over there, right behind me, actually does. This is the exciting but also quite sad story of the abandoned ghost town Doel. Wo sind wir denn jetzt hier gelandet? Okay, I just arrived in Doel and let me tell you one thing. It's a wild ride. If you want to go here, you have to drive through a huge harbor terminal with huge ships and huge cranes and huge lorries and stuff like that. And you feel totally wrong there with your own private car. There was a bridge closed. I took the wrong lane several times. Yeah, it's a wild ride. But anyway, I'm finally here. And now let's take a little tour through the ghost town Doel. I decided not to drive with the car into the village. Here's a little parking space right beside the street. Over there, there's the power plant. For several reasons. First of all, I think we will see much more of the village if we just take a little walk through the village and not just go there with a car. And the second reason is obviously people, but also the authorities don't really like that people go there all the time with a car. I will show you what I mean. So, here we are at the entrance of Doel, and as you can see, this is not an ordinary town entrance. We can see a barrier system here and a lot of signs, and there is also a reason for that. Doel has a huge problem with vandalism. Doel also has a huge problem with youth groups, especially, at least that's what I read, from the Netherlands, who then go here on the weekends and they do like techno parties and ghost tourism and stuff like that. And that's why those barriers here are raised on certain days, especially on the weekends. Then you are not able to enter the village by car. With one exception, and that's the funny thing about it, if you have a Belgian identity card, you can put it into this machine over here and the barrier goes down and you can drive into the village by car. If I would come here with my German identity card, I would not be able to drive into the town with my car. Also, Dutch people are not able to drive into town. Interesting, right? However, today is a weekday, so I would be able to drive into this village. But as I said, let's better do a little walk so we can see a bit more of the village Doel. By the way, there is also a huge warning sign here at the entrance of the town in various languages saying that you should please behave here. The reason is, of course, that Doel is not completely deserted. A handful of people still live here, and of course they want to be left alone and not have scary tourists on their doorstep all day long. So that in mind, let's behave ourselves and let's walk into the village. Well, and the first thing that we can see here at the entrance of the town is a bus stop that is no longer really wind and rainproof, I would say. But the bus, in fact, still runs here, as we can see from this sign here. I think at least once a day. Yeah, once a day at 6:52, if I read that correctly. In other words, the infrastructure of the town has been largely maintained for the few remaining people who still live here. But yeah, if we take a look to the right side of the street, we can already see the first abandoned residential building. But before we have a closer look at all of those abandoned houses, I would like to give you a quick overview. Here are some facts you should know about Doel, and don't skip, I'll be quick. Well, the small Belgian village can actually look back on a quite eventful history. It's not entirely clear how old Doel actually is. However, the first documented mention occurred in 1267, when the village was completely surrounded by peat bogs. In the 13th century, a lot of peat was mined here, which wasn't particularly good for the area. There were repeated massive floods here, which also affected Doel. Even after that, life didn't really get any better here. The 80 Years' War and various sieges followed. Sometimes Doel belonged to the Emperor of Austria, sometimes to the Netherlands. Where this windmill stands today, there was once even a fortress of a Dutch garrison. Doel only became an independent municipality after Belgium's independence. Until we Germans came along and occupied it. This happened on May 22nd, 1940, and on September 8th, 1944, Doel was finally liberated. To this day, a war memorial at the Church of Doel commemorates this day. And from that day on, the village continued to grow. More and more was built here, and more people wanted to live here. Well, until the day the final decline of the village began, but more on that later. Okay, those are the facts, and now let's have a closer look at all of those abandoned houses. Well, this is the first house that we can see at the entrance of the village of Doel. A house that is quite typical for all the other houses that we will see on our trip today. This is, I would say, a single family home. You can see that the windows have been covered with boards and metal so that you don't go in there. I'm not really sure if this really stops people, because in the past few decades, Doel had all sorts of unwelcome visitors here. There was a time when there were a lot of squatters, for example, who simply moved here, but they were thrown out of the village a few years after that. Then there was I would call them the party community, which celebrated techno parties and stuff like that in the village. There's also some kind of a ghost community and fans of abandoned places and stuff like that who come here with their cameras and they go into the houses and shoot videos there. I've seen videos on YouTube of people staying in those houses overnight as a test of courage. All of that happened here in the past few years, and all of that is not allowed. There is a big sign telling you, please don't enter those houses, because today it's also a bit dangerous to do that. The houses are not in a good condition anymore, and a lot of them are also in danger of collapsing by now. And there are also cameras, police cameras, all over the village that will record you if you break into those houses, so better don't do it. And if we start walking into the village, we can already see the church tower of Doel. A church that is still in operation. Is that the right word for a church in operation? I don't know, but you know what I mean. Yeah, it's one of the few buildings here in Doel that is actually still open to the public. But if we take a look to the right, we can also see a bunch of cranes. Yeah, the whole village of Doel is completely surrounded by this port area. Of course, in the village of Doel, there were not only living houses, there was also a farm here, for example. This seems to be some kind of a driveway or something, a huge gate at the end of this driveway. And behind this gate, we can see the relics of a farm. Yeah, but the farmers left long time ago. Some of the houses were already demolished. That's what you can see here, for example. This is a place where a house was standing in the past. You can still see those barricades there, for example, that you don't drive there. Yeah, but the house is long gone. Well, and if you walk down the street, this is also what you will find here. Right beside all of those abandoned houses and properties, there are still a few houses that are still inhabited. You see, there is still a car in front of the house. There's also a sign on the little gate that says welcome. It's quite fascinating, quite surreal to see that, right? Everything is completely deserted here, but every now and then in this abandoned, quiet ghost town, there is still a little sign of life. This house is also quite interesting because it's painted blue in a very eye-catching way, and there is also a reason for that. A few years ago, like 10-15 years ago, there was a movement of street artists here in Doel. They walked through the village and they painted all of those abandoned old buildings. It was not graffiti, it was more like beautiful works of art. You could see huge animals here on the walls of the houses or comic figures and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure also this blue painted house is still a relic of that time. Here we can see a house totally overgrown with ivy. The nature in the whole village has taken everything back. And over here we can see an abandoned gas station or something. At least it looks like it. Yeah, and right next to the gas station, two fully painted living houses. Yeah, let's have a closer look at the gas station. Those things that you can see over here must have been the two gas pumps. And on the other side of the street, we can also see another gas station, or at least what's left of it. This house over here was extremely secured with barbed wire so that you don't break in. And it also looks a bit creepy, doesn't it? A very old, creepy villa in an abandoned ghost town. Well, and here we are at the center of the village of Doel. There are actually two ways that we could go. The path straight ahead leads to the water, and if we walk to the right, we will reach the church of Doel. I would say let's go to the right first. What we can see here is the old school building of Doel. Yes, Doel had an elementary school, even though this village is quite small. But they closed it around the year 2003 or so, when they realized, oh, only 8 students enrolled. I think we don't need them anymore. Yeah, and this is what the school looks like today. It's completely painted and scribbled and smeared. Apparently there used to be a swing here right in front of the school, which of course isn't there anymore either. Only this frame is still standing here. Well, and over here apparently somebody tried to recreate GTA in real life. And this is it, the Church of Doel, one of the few buildings in this village that is not abandoned. Also, the cemetery right in front of the church is still maintained. Let's take a look if the church maybe is open today. Okay, it's not, but it was worth a try. And right next to the church, we will find the furthest corner of the village, and once again we can see an inhabited house at the end of this corner. I would say it's a quiet place to live here, but also a little bit creepy, isn't it? This is a typical street of the center of Doel. Imagine just a few decades ago, all those houses here were still inhabited. There were people walking up and down the street, there were children playing here. Nothing is left of it. Today, I'm all alone here. Here's another reminder for us not to break into any of those houses here. And if you take a look at the roof, there is also the camera. Yes, I'm being watched right now. Greetings to the police, Varsland Nord. The exciting thing is, until this year, there were still 2 remaining restaurants in this town. One is located in the Windmill, a small cafe, and also this pub over here was still open until this year, but also the owners of this pub decided to close their business. Oh. Yeah, and over here from the dike we can see Doel in all its glory from above. Over there, the ships, over there, the harbor, and over there, the nuclear power plant with a windmill in front of it. It's a surreal place, really. Well, and that is how Doel looks like today. But now, finally, let's answer the most important question. Why the heck is Doel abandoned? What happened to this beautiful small village? Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, this harbor that you can see over there and over there and over there and actually all around the village plays a quite important role in this story. The whole drama begins in the 1960s. At that time, a massive expansion of the port of Antwerp is discussed for the first time. More specifically, a port and an industrial area is planned to be built on the left bank of the Scheldt, that's the river that flows here. For the small village of Doel, this means, if the plans come to fruition, the entire village needs to be demolished. This is not a completely unusual idea. Also, other villages had to give way to the construction of the Antwerp port. They were called Oosterwiel, Orderen, Lillo or Wilmersdonk. A curious landmark can still be seen from the latter today. The village's old church tower still stands in the middle of the harbour area of Antwerp, the only thing that's left of the village. A similar fate is now to befall Doel. At the end of the 1960s, the plans slowly begin to become reality. A construction ban is imposed in the town without an official decision being made to expand the port. No expropriations or anything similar are carried out. Instead, a long period of uncertainty begins for the residents. No one knows exactly what will be decided and what will happen to Doel in the long term. Then, in the 1970s, 10 years after the first plans were drawn up, politicians suddenly start talking about the possibility of simply building the port around Doel. According to these plans, the village would not have to disappear at all. In 1978, even the State Secretary for Regional Economy, Mark Aiskins, arrives by helicopter in Doel to announce that the village could now stay for good. At that time, also the construction of this nuclear power plant begins. By the way, an absolutely scandalous power plant. In recent years, there have been repeated reports of cracks and incidents. At least the controversial Reactor 3 is out of operation since last year. Anyway, in Doel, the people actually don't really care about the power plant. Their village finally is saved. The long period of uncertainty finally is over. Well, at least around 20 years. In the year 1995, new plans come up to expand the port of Antwerp. I make it short. Another long period of uncertainty begins with several changes of government and even newer crazy plans, and at some point it's pretty clear the fight is over. Sooner or later, Doel will have to give way to the port expansion. From the early 2000s, people gradually begin to leave the village. They are able to sell the houses to the local development company, and the first house demolitions also begin in the mid-2000s. The authorities also start to impose a ban. No one is allowed to move to Doel anymore. The village falls into disrepair. Of the population, which once numbered more than 1,000 people, only 21 still live here today. And at this point, the story could be over. Doel obviously is a doomed place, and sooner or later it will disappear completely. But no, in fact, it's not that easy. As the years go by, something unusual happens in Doel. Something that elsewhere is often doomed to failure. The last remaining residents begin to protest on a large scale. They start to found an action group called Doel 2020. Over the years, countless lawsuits arise, and even people from the music and art scene start to support the small village. For years, no, decades, large signs hang on the walls of the houses in Doel to make clear this village is here to stay. Well, and then, at the end of the 2010s, politicians suddenly start changing their plans. The Flemish minister Ben Waits unexpectedly proposes a new port expansion plan. In contrast to all previous plans, this one also envisages the preservation of the village of Doel. The planned port would then have a kind of bend to the south so that it would no longer run directly through the village. And then the Flemish government finally decides to implement these plans. What exactly does this mean for Doel's future? Well, not clear. A lot has been decided in the past few decades that was then repeatedly rejected, but as it currently looks, the village actually is saved. And there are already discussions between the authorities and residents about lifting the entry ban and allowing people to return to Doel. And that's the moving story of Doel. Now, time will tell what will happen to this ghost town in the future. I actually don't know if I would want to live here, to be honest. It's quiet, yeah, it's really quiet. If there are no cars and no ghost hunters and no party people and stuff like that. But you would have to do a lot of renovation stuff to make Doel like shiny again. And I don't know if you can hear that through the microphone. I also don't really know if I would want to live right next to this huge harbor area, because you can hear the sound of the cranes and stuff like that, like all the time. You always hear this talk, talk, talk and stuff like that. It's quite loud. Well, anyway, I don't know if I want to live here, but if Doel will come alive again, time will tell. So, that was my story about the abandoned ghost town Doel. It was quite cold today and also quite rainy. Anyway, if you liked my video, if you liked my report about the ghost town, then please leave a thumbs up. You can also hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss any upcoming video. And if you like to support me and my work, you can also do that on Patreon, for example. There's a link in the video description. That would be very nice of you. But you will also get a lot of exclusive stuff over there and also new videos before everyone else. So you should check that out. So, that's it for today. Have a safe journey. See you next time.